Game forces you to choose the difficulty setting 2 times in a row. They're still reusing the tutorial from Game 4.
George and Beth arranged this little vacation for me, and sometimes their plans don't work out so well.
It's confirmed! Nancy hates her friends.
Called Snake Horse Harbor. Kind of a creepy name for a town, don't you think?
Deception Island is a way creepier name, but Nancy completely ignores it. The bicycle helmet here is a different color from the one Nancy uses. When Nancy first arrives, Katie is standing in place and staring at the wall. Katie leads a very boring life. How did Katie get that bag of groceries here if she traveled by bicycle? Nancy goes on vacation and accidentally uncovers a mystery cliché. Katie tells Nancy to enjoy herself, and then proceeds to lecture her for a minute, which is the exact opposite of enjoyment.
Your bunk's the empty one below.
There's no bunk bed here. Nancy has to wait for all the ice to melt before she can see what's inside here, because she doesn't know how coolers work. This puzzle. The puzzle tells you to right-click to rotate the pieces, but you don't have to rotate them in order to solve the puzzle. The game gives no indication that this puzzle must be solved from the bottom up. Andy literally left his calling card at the crime scene. Worst culprit of the year. Katie's food selection is pretty awful, considering that she just bought groceries 10 minutes ago. Why does Katie have jellyfish in her fridge? Sure, it's labeled, but one groggy midnight snack and she's in trouble. Why does Katie have so much old, expired food in her fridge? Is she saving it for something? According to this calendar, Katie only takes 1 coffee break a month. Katie is way too excited about going to Jenna's cafe, considering the two of them hate each other. Oh hey, Nancy has a new anagram buster. Gee, I wonder if there will be an anagram challenge in this game. Once again, Nancy can't send email. According to these emails, Nancy's father is incompetent. You can't call Bess and George at the start of the game, even though Nancy's journal and task list tell you to do so. Nancy is intrigued by the empty microscope. Nancy does everyone else's chores cliché. This puzzle. Why does clicking on 1 book move 3 books? Did Katie glue them together or something? Culprit does not accuse Nancy of being a meddling kid.
Katie said I shouldn't use her cassette without a jeeper inside.
Nancy talks at the same time Nancy talks. Andy's hair and fake buff flannel. When you first meet Andy, he tells you about the recent robberies. It's later revealed the culprits work for him, so that means he ratted out his employees to Nancy for no reason.
Miss, please don't touch that.
Later on, he forces you to touch it. Game forces you to learn things, ew. This puzzle. Same sound effect for 4 different actions. That confused me so much when I first played this game. One of the prizes on the wheel is a caddy cap, but there are no caps for sale in the gift area. Bald eagle butt.
And for letting me use your camera.
Nancy is staying on a whale-watching tour boat and she didn't bring her own camera. Nancy becomes overly obsessed with this one piece of driftwood, because it will become relevant to the plotline later on. Nancy doesn't investigate who sabotaged Katie's boat. Sure, she tells all the other characters about it, but beyond that, she doesn't do anything to help identify the saboteur culprit. Here's a postcard of crab biology. That's something people want to send to their friends, right? Why does the culprit feed the orca with non-native fish? It should be cheaper and easier to get local fish. Holt drinks coffee with the mug handle turned away from him. Holt encourages Nancy to vote for him, even though he knows that she's a tourist who can't vote in local elections. With no prompting at all, Holt gives Nancy a long lecture on caddy and Shanghaiing, mainly because it becomes important to the plot later on. They're not very subtle in this game. Everybody in town has heard about these secret tunnels, but nobody draws a connection between them and the robberies.
You know what else I got in my duffel?
How did Holt fit that giant crab container inside the tiny little duffel? Holt holds everything in the exact same position. Holt wants Nancy to do a quiz? At this point, I would ask someone else if they have a GPS. In order to go kayaking, Nancy must answer a bunch of questions that have nothing at all to do with kayaking. Holt's quiz contains a blatant political advertisement for himself. Rises in the sky! No? Nancy will ask Jenna to identify Andy, even if she's already met Andy. Jenna gives Nancy unlimited free food. How does she stay in business? Jenna and Andy have no problems gossiping about Hilda's mental problems. You pick up the same book if your cursor is here or here. Holt forces Nancy to get a crab, then he arrests her if she gets it wrong. Holt is a jerk. Holt comes from the left in this scene, which is impossible because he's not there when you check that area, and besides, the spot is closed off by a fence. Why is Holt so protective of the lighthouse? That was never explained.
See you around the compass.
The Hardy Boys somehow know Nancy's phone is next to a compass rose.
His number's 360-555-3095.
Katie has memorized the phone number of the local cargo container enthusiast. Katie owns a complicated book on wood, but Nancy can't refer to her for help with the wood puzzle. Nancy can't look up information on wood on the internet. Dr. Pretavichu's book contains that photograph of herself and her phone number. She must be desperate for a date. The water level changes whenever you grab your kayak gear. There's a big white gap where the smaller headline should be. The newspaper's byline reads, "Deception Silent." In a town full of fishermen with GPSs, nobody but Nancy recognizes W123 and N48 as being part of local coordinates. Gravity doesn't work like that. Nancy is murmuring an awful lot for somebody who only wrote 2 letters. Game automatically replaces the text you wrote for no apparent reason. Nancy takes 2 of the papers with her, but leaves Hilda's letter behind. Why? Why does Andy give this to all of his customers? It's got meaningless letters on it. Nancy is too cheap to pay for a small keychain. Why does Jenna have a giant mayonnaise bucket? None of the items on her menu include mayonnaise.
Free to look at the chess book in my duffel bag if you need help.
Nancy interprets this to mean she can look inside Holt's duffel bag whenever she wants to now. Holt is bad at chess. Nancy has to redo the code and the stove latch every time she re-enters the lighthouse. Why? Did someone sneak in and reset it when she's not there? We never learn who was up in the lighthouse, why they were in the lighthouse, or why they circled today's date. We're just left to guess. The culprits did it because reasons.
Ordinarily you could, but permits mean paperwork.
Do your job, Andy. Andy and Jenna join the long line of Nancy Drew characters who claim to be constantly busy when all they do is stand behind a desk all day.
Inside that box marked caddy.
The puzzle pieces are clearly located outside the box. This puzzle. $14.95 for this? What a ripoff. The clamming challenge is long and boring. Why is this the only website in the game which has a URL? Dr. Pretavichu won't answer her phone unless you're standing at a specific spot. This puzzle. Jenna says the necklace is the prettiest thing she owns, but it's actually kind of ugly. Nancy dodges a falling object puzzle reused from previous game. Nancy doesn't die when this heavy rock drops on her head.
Like they also stole a bunch of tools and some boat parts.
Why does Jenna have tools and boat parts at her restaurant? Holt leaves his duffel bag behind whenever he leaves the cafe. Nancy finds a hidden passageway cliché. Katie forces Nancy to get her a sandwich, even though she could easily walk over there and make a sandwich herself. Every sandwich looks exactly the same.
Hey, I just got done emailing you something.
How did Casey get Nancy's email address? Why does Casey think Nancy cares about old stained glass pictures? If the culprits use this area every single day this week, why are both sides of the door locked? If you enter the tunnel through the lighthouse, you can't go out through the exit that leads to the rest of the town, so how did the culprits use these tunnels to rob stores? The light looks exactly the same after Nancy cleans off all the rust. It's amazing how quickly and easily Hilda translates Nancy's phone number from Morse code. Hilda calls Nancy in order to send her an email. She could have easily sent Nancy an email from the start. How did Hilda get Nancy's email address? How did Hilda learn Nancy's name? Nancy can't confront Katie about the fish she uses to feed the orca. Hilda's scavenger hunt more or less forces you to do the same thing 3 times in a row. It's long and boring. Good thing Hilda prepared this entire scavenger hunt months before the culprits appeared, because otherwise the game would only be half as long. If Hilda really wanted to stop the culprit, she wouldn't be messing around with scavenger hunts. She would have called the police and told them about the secret tunnels. Nancy should also tell the police about the secret tunnels. Benjamin Hawkins built all of this with 1866 technology. Why did the culprit steal Katie's work gloves? They have free access to a hardware store. Why wasn't Katie using her work gloves when she's working the entire game? Why did the culprits hide the cargo in this cave? Later on, they move it to their ship. Wouldn't it make more sense just to move it to their ship in the first place and not bother with the cave? Nancy doesn't look at the smuggled cargo here. Why not? Nancy doesn't bring any of this evidence back for the sheriff or the Coast Guard. How does Nancy know the exact time when the smugglers will be stealing more cargo? Did I miss something here? Nancy put in a lot of work to find the culprits, but Katie came across them by pure chance. Just think, Nancy could have spent the whole day napping on Katie's boat and the outcome would have been the same. Since Andy's the culprit, why does he help Nancy sneak on board the smuggler's ship without stopping her or capturing her or something? Culprit foils their own plot. Nancy breaks into the culprit's hideout with no real plan of what to do or how to get back out.
Whale's making her final dive.
No, the whale is clearly still inside the ship, not diving. Gee, these smugglers look familiar. Have I seen this three-person lineup anywhere else? Oh. Fortunately for Nancy, the smugglers are taking a break from evil doing so they can explain their plot through clunky exposition. Andy doesn't warn the other smugglers that he's bringing Nancy to them. The smugglers are more worried about Nancy than about the fact they kidnapped someone less than an hour ago.
I can't call anyone now. Someone might hear me.
Nancy says this even when she's in the secluded below decks area where no one can possibly hear her. The ship has a whale-sized tank. Why didn't they just keep the orca here at all times? That way they wouldn't have attracted attention from locals. Why does Andy have a sack lunch on this desk? Did Andy not eat today? Katie's arms are tied, but her legs are not. Why doesn't she try getting up, moving around, looking for something to cut the ropes?
Shh! Listen.
Andy's too far away to see the girls, so how are his footsteps that loud? Nancy doesn't think to put the gag back on in order to fool Andy.
Hey, how'd you get that gag off? Well, it appears she's already here.
Andy believes it's impossible for Katie to get the gag off on her own. Why doesn't Katie buy Nancy some time by kicking Andy here? Andy is surprised to learn Nancy is on the ship when he literally brought her there. No matter where Nancy is standing, she teleports to this location for strangulation. Strangling culprit reused from previous game.
Somebody stop her!
Andy calls for someone to stop Nancy when nobody else is around to hear him. How did Andy manage to shut and lock the door when he was nowhere near it? If you try to use the air tank on Andy, he deflects it like it's made out of paper. Nancy would have to be hovering over the water to throw the air tank at this specific angle. Andy is knocked unconscious when the orca throws the air tank at him, but when the same thing happened to Nancy earlier, she wasn't hurt at all. Both Nancy and Andy should be severely injured from having air tanks thrown at them at high speed. It's nice that Holt had a change of heart and decided he cares about Nancy and Katie's safety. Too bad all this happened off screen, so we never get to see any of it.
The plan he cooked up to recover smuggled animal furs was a darn good one.
No, it wasn't.
First, he got himself an orca that the Russians had trained for covert military operations.
Andy has covert Russian military contacts. We don't learn the results of Holt's selection. Non-moving horse is non-moving. Whoever wrote the credits clearly was afraid they couldn't spell Dr. Irina Predoviciu correctly.
Nuts.